Okay, let's unless someone wants to share something, let's begin what Rabbi Wohlgemuth is going to teach us. Is that good? Everyone ready? Okay. Focusing one's attention. So I'll begin reading some of the text. There are different types of kavana, or he translates it as awareness. We could translate it as focus, intention. Joe already told us sincerity. So there are different categories of kavana. He's speaking from a very halachic perspective initially. So let me just frame the first paragraph. The first kind of kavana he's going to be speaking about is in halacha, it's deemed either kavana latzeit, an intention to fulfill the mitzvah, kavana sa mitzvah, the intention to the basic mitzvah. And that's the question is as follows. The question of intention, in any moral system, any legal system, right? It's always going to be a question. How much does it matter what you were intending? And how much does it matter what you actually did? And that could be in terms of something bad, a crime, and also in terms of something good, a mitzvah, a good deed, right? When do you get credit? When should you get punished? Does it only matter what you actually do, what the outcome was? Or does it matter what you were thinking? What if you intended, but it didn't come to fruition? What if you did it, but you didn't intend to do it? So this is a big question throughout the Torah. So there's a great debate in the Talmud. In order to fulfill any mitzvah, must you have the basic awareness and intention that I am doing a mitzvah and I wish to fulfill it? And if you don't have that basic awareness and intention, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah. Or the other opinion is, no, if you did the mitzvah, you did the mitzvah. And it's not necessary to have even that basic awareness and intention. The classic examples in the Gemara are, you're blowing the shofar in Rosh Hashanah as a musical instrument, right? You're not doing it for the mitzvah, but you did blow the shofar. Do we say, listen, he did it? Doesn't matter that he didn't intend to be fulfilling the Torah? Or do we say that no, if he doesn't even have that basic intention, it does not count and he must do it again? Or, you get confused on what day of the calendar it is. And, you happen to enjoy matzah. There are some people that enjoy matzah. And so you just ate matzah. Then someone said, it's the night of the Seder. But you weren't intending that. You were just eating it because you enjoy it. So do we require a basic intention to fulfill the mitzvah, or is that not necessary? That is a great debate in the Gemara. How do we paskin? Who wants to take a guess? It's just a guess, so it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. Or what would your intuition be? Do we require basic intention to fulfill a mitzvah?
That's a classic question of mitzvah strichos kavana or not.
That's right. That's how the Gemara phrases it. So how do we paskin? Just say yes or no.
No.
Anyone? No?
No need for kavana, no.
Okay. So the answer is it's really not resolved. It really was never resolved. And so in terms of a practical matter, we say for a Torah mitzvah, you must need kavana. We're strict for a Torah mitzvah. For a rabbinic mitzvah, we're not strict. So, but obviously we should always, have that basic awareness. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth, now we're going to read again, is going to be explaining that basic kavana. Begin with the second sentence. While reciting the blessing, I can concentrate on the idea that I'm fulfilling a mitzvah, a commandment, by performing this act. First, we encounter a difficulty on the holiday of Sukkot. He's going to give an example to illuminate this idea. On the one hand, I cannot say the blessing over the lulav and esrog until I hold them in my hands, because otherwise too much time would elapse between the recital of the blessing and the performance of the commandment. You must, whenever you're reciting a blessing, you're supposed to have the object already in your hand. You should have the apple in your hand. You should have the shofar in your hand. You should be ready to do it. But on the other hand, if I take them in my hands, if I'm already holding the daled minim, I have already primarily fulfilled the commandment, even before reciting the blessing, because the basic Torah commandment, it's enough just to lift the daled minim, the lulav and esrog. So if I've already lifted it, I've already fulfilled the mitzvah, and then it's too late to recite the blessing. Everyone understand the problem? If you've already picked it up, it's too late. If you have not yet picked it up, it's too early. Normally for the shofar, you pick it up, you recite the blessing, you blow it. you hold the matzah in your hand, you say alachilas matzah, and then you eat it. You're holding the mezuzah in your hand, you say likboa mezuzah, and then you affix it to the doorpost. But here, once you've picked it up, it's already too late. You've already done the basic mitzvah. The shaking is not necessary, so it's too late to say the blessing.
With the esrog, you have to have the pitum up or down.
Well, okay, let's continue. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth explains in the next paragraph, one of the ways to get around this problem suggested by Tosfos is to lift the lulav and esrog with the intention specifically not to carry out the commandment. So you lift it up, is what Tosfos suggests, and you're having in mind, I do not want to fulfill the mitzvah yet. I have no intention to fulfill the mitzvah. I then say the blessing, declare our readiness to fulfill our obligation. And then once I recite the blessing, then I have intention to fulfill the mitzvah, and I fulfill the mitzvah. In this way, the blessing precedes the action of the commandment. This kind of awareness is called the intention to fulfill the commandment. We are ready to perform our obligation. So he's just trying to give an example to illuminate it, but every mitzvah requires some, let's assume a person should have some basic focus, intention. I'm ready to do a mitzvah. So davening is no different. So before you daven, you have the basic intention. I'm about to pray and fulfill the mitzvah of davening. Okay, that's kind of a general awareness. Let's continue. The second type of awareness consists of understanding the meaning of every word of our prayers. This is where it gets difficult. Prayer tefillah has an additional layer of intention and focus. The awareness of the understanding the meaning of every word of our prayers. This kind of concentration is very difficult, since the human mind finds it almost impossible to focus for any length of time on any one idea. This is why the Shulchan Aruch states that nowadays we are not careful about certain details, since we cannot concentrate so much in our davening. Shulchan Aruch was written 500 years ago. He's quoting even earlier sources. The rabbis warn us not to throw a blessing out of our mouths. By this, they declare that we must understand and ponder its meaning. Okay, any comments or reactions to this paragraph?
How about when some people say Hineni Mukhana Muzuman before everything?
Excellent. So some have the custom, it's really more of a Hasidic custom, that before performing a mitzvah and before reciting the blessing on a mitzvah, there is a paragraph before where a person states, Hine Muchan Muzuman Lakayim mitzvah datadat. Behold, I am ready, prepared to fulfill this mitzvah. And the point of that recital is to prepare oneself to have the basic intention to fulfill the mitzvah. Others did not endorse that practice because to some degree, that's just what every bracha is supposed to do. So, before you know it, you'll have to have another paragraph to make sure you have right intention for the Hini Muchna Mazuman paragraph, right? It will never end. But yes, Linda.
No, I was thinking maybe it's like something that people do is to build up a conditioned response. Like it's sort of a signal like, okay, I need to focus on this.
You're right. That is the intention. That is the intention. I'm surprised you, Linda, would I know you're a strong misnagid, but that's right. Really a Hasidic practice. But you're right.
It's in the Vilna Siddur.
Okay, I
don't know.
I'll have to check that.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's continue. Oh yeah, sorry. Please. Who wants to say something?
Double check. It's my recollection that in the new text for the OU Press version, this whole section is much expanded. I will check it, and if it is, I'll send that material to you. You can share it with the group.
Great, Steve. Thank you. Okay, let's continue. The ideal way of reciting the prayer called the Shema is to think of the meaning of every single word. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, is that realistic for Shema to think of the meaning of every single word?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I'll challenge you. I will challenge everyone and challenge myself. it might not be realistic to think of the meaning of every single word every time you say Shema your entire life. But it's certainly is an attainable goal every once in a while, right? To think of every word of Shema, I think at least.
Well,
I'm not claiming I do it so often, but it's an attainable goal.
The beginning.
We may not make it.
Yeah, sorry, Dove, were you going to say something?
It's enough for the first pasuk. Shema Yisrael.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. Next
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah.
The rabbis, understanding human psychology, declared that only if one lacks this awareness in the first verse must one repeat the Shema. So exactly, this is an example of ideally you should be thinking about the meaning in every single word of Shema, but it is only necessary in the sense of requiring you to repeat it in the first pasuk. But even that, I share, personal experience. Your mind can wander even in the first pasuk. That happens also. And really, if someone realizes they were not thinking when they said that first pasuk, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, you really should say it again. I've certainly done that. Let's finish the paragraph. We cannot reasonably expect a person to concentrate properly for the entire prayer, but the lack of kavana during the first verse necessitates a new recital of the Shema. Let me share with you a story. In Yeshiva University and Rav Soloveitchik lore, they share the following story. I can't point to a specific source, but they say the following. In the old days, so the bechinas, the tests for smicha, were oral. They were not written tests. And a young man would come in front of the Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Shaskis, and I think it's Rav David Lifshitz, and maybe sometimes Rabbi Belkin. And presumably they were supposed to ask you on the material that you were supposed to study, but you never knew exactly what you were going to be asked. And again, they say the story as follows, that one time the Rav, maybe he had a certain sense about this certain student, I don't know, and he asked the student to open up a siddur. And he asked him to open up a siddur. I'm seeing if I have a siddur handy, to Shema. Okay, someone will, I'm not here, one second, let me just grab the siddur. And he pointed to the following pasuk. Don't worry, I'm not going to call in anyone. But the Rav read the pasuk. V'nasati metar tzechem bi'ito yoreh u'malkosh. And he asked the young man, please translate for me, yoreh u'malkosh. Don't worry, I'm not going to call on you to translate it. And the young man could not translate it. And so the Rav said, please come back in a week and make sure you know how to translate that pasuk. It, by the way, means the early and late rain. It's not the easiest English Hebrew words. It says, I will supply the rain for your land in the proper time. Yoreh, the early rain in its proper time. Umalkosh, and the late rain in its proper time. So it's an amusing story. I'm sure there are many things we can learn from it. But one lesson to learn from it is that, and I speak to myself also, a prerequisite to, having kavana is obviously we have to know what the words mean. And there is some hard Hebrew, and many people don't have the benefit of the same Jewish education that I was blessed with. But certainly for key texts like Shema, we should take the time to every once in a while just remind ourselves of of what the words mean. And that's I recognize that it's harder for some than others. We maybe can't expect it for all of davening, but key things we should try to familiarize ourselves with.
I think in Eretz Israel, the first rains that come after
Heavy rain.
are considered to be the Yoreh.
Yeah, I guess it's still a modern Hebrew word. I wasn't aware.
Yorah means to throw, the heavy rains, to throw. Yorah means to throw. That's correct.
Okay.
Rabbi Hellman, may
Yes.
I, since you're talking
Share
about
whatever you want,
Shema,
Joe.
you're talking about Kavana, I just want to add a thought that I heard from Rabbi Wida, on this particular issue. I asked him the following question. In Musaf of Kedusha of Shabbat, the basic elements of Shema have been introduced. I shan't go into why, and I shan't go into why the Rambam objected. I shan't go into all of that. I just want to go into, my question to him was, obviously the Shliach Tzibur stops his invitation with the two words Shema Omrim, and the Mispalim respond with the 6 words Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Echad. The Shliach Tzibur, to show he's one of the Mispalim, obviously repeats those 6 words and then goes into the next invitation, what the Rav called call and response, or invitation and response. And my question was, where does this next invitation end, and what is our response? And his response, Rabbi Wida's response was, the last words in the invitation are Liot Lachem Elokim, and our response is Ani Hashem Elokeichem. And he explained why. He said, these 9 words really constitute the essence of Kriya Shema. What does Hashem Elokeinu mean? It means HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are our political leader. I know the Chumash, the Bible uses the word king and subjects, but in modern terminology, let me use the term political leader, the legislator of the state. We are the citizens of this state. Hashem Elokeinu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I want to be a citizen in your state. I want to be a subject in your kingdom. This Shema, of course, as you know, other than the fact that Yaakov Avinu was made this statement, really appears in the book of Devarim, which is at the end of the 40 years. Parshat Tzitzis appears at the end of Parshat Shlach, which is at the beginning of, basically almost at the beginning of the 40 years. Look at the last sentence. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, asher atzeitzem eretz Yisrael, liot lechem Elokim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu identifies himself, who he is. And he identifies himself by saying, I made the decision to take you out of Egypt for the purpose of you being my personal people. There are many human beings on this earth, but I took you out and assembled you into a nation. And obviously, because of one of the 6 Noahide laws, I'm required to produce a legal system, which in this case is called Tayag Mitzvot. And then he says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem. And at first we think this is just a repetition of the first 3 words in the sentence, but it isn't. In the first 3 words of the sentence, he's identifying himself. Ani Hashem Elokeichem, he is taking our words, Hashem Elokeinu, and using them to say, I accept you as a subject in my kingdom. I accept you to be a citizen in the state in which I am the political leader, in which I am the legislator. And that's why when it was required to consolidate, if you will, to just take that part of Kriya Shema that represents the essence of Kriya Shema, it was these 9 words. And that's why it's so important for the Shliach Tzibur to stop, to end his invitation, is in fact, the 3 words, the Yot Lechem, are there purposely to tell us that this Ani Hashem Elokeichem is the last 3 words in the sentence and not the first 3 words in the sentence.
Very interesting.
And therefore, he's identifying, here he's not identifying himself. Here he is responding to our request and he is accepting us. So I just listened from Rabbi Wieder, and I thought it would be of interest.
Okay, I know many people here knew Rabbi Wieder, and I'm sure enjoy hearing Torah quoting his name also. Let's read one more paragraph in Rabbi Wohlgemuth. We have a similar law regarding the Amida or Shemona Esrei. You obviously should be thinking about the meaning, the entire Shemona Esrei, but we only have to repeat the whole prayer if we failed to read the first blessing with the proper amount of awareness. In principle, the halacha is you need to be thinking about the words, the first bracha, And if your mind spaced out, you must go back and begin again. But even that became too hard for us. Again, today, even in this case, we do not say the whole prayer a second time. Why? This is what the Shulchan Aruch says, written 500 years ago. Close to that. We assume the repeated prayer will not be any more meaningful. Let me repeat that. The Shulchan Aruch itself says, if you space down the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, you really need to go back and begin again. But nowadays, we don't do that, says the Shulchan Aruch, because we assume your second Shemona Esrei won't be any better. That's what it says. Or at least there's a very good chance. And if there's a very good chance, you shouldn't say Hashem's name again and say the bracha again. If there's a very good chance, it's not going to be any better. Now, so again, on the one hand, we can commiserate. This is not a new problem, but shouldn't let us off the hook either. We just have to try to work a little bit harder. Another sort of idea to take from this, though, is again the halacha recognized that ideally a person should have kavana, should be thinking about what they're saying, and obviously there are layers of kavana. One can just understand the translation of the word, and one can say it with heartfelt meaning and connection and emotion, and there can be unending degrees of depth and feeling and connection. But even just the basic awareness of the meaning of the words is very powerful. But the halakha understood it's unrealistic to require that always. So there were key lines that, at least in principle, the halakha required it. The first line of Shema, the first bracha of Shemona Esrei. But one tactic that we can take from this is that it is totally unrealistic for a person to declare, all right, I'm committed, I'm going to have kavanah all of davening. But a person can say in their own personal davening, their own personal growth, I'm really going to try to focus and have kavanah on this small section. And maybe that is just the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, or the first line or first paragraph of Shema. Or when we get to it, Birchot HaShachar, the morning brachos, can be very powerful. Thank you, Hashem, that I can open my eyes and see. Thank you, Hashem, that I can stand on my 2 feet. These are when we get to them, what those brachos mean. Some people might find those brachos as a very meaningful place to try to have intention. So, and focus and awareness. So, that's something to think about. Feel free to share anything, but that's something that, is personal, what you would like to focus on it. And obviously it can change, for a certain period of time, you commit yourself to, I'm really going to try hard to the beginning of Shemona Esrei, the first bracha, or maybe Modim in Shemona Esrei, but that's something to think about, I think. I was asked, what's the solution to this problem that we don't have kavanah? There is no solution, but that's one, I think one thing to consider. One thing to consider. Any thoughts? Okay, we'll continue. Continuing Rabbi Wohlgemuth. Jewish folklore contains many stories about the importance of kavanah. One story talks of a child who could not master the skill of reading the machzor, the high holiday prayer book. During the high holiday services, his father pressed a machzor into his hands, hoping that he could at least follow the chazan during the parts of the prayers. Suddenly, during the most solemn part of the services, the boy whistled loudly. His father, deadly embarrassed, shrieked at his son. Right, it's disturbing. Imagine middle of Unasana Tokef, and there's this 10-year-old boy or teenager, whistling. The rabbi who had witnessed the scene calmed the father, saying, "If the Almighty has accepted our prayers today, it is because of your son's whistling. None of us reached complete kavana during today's services, but your son did. He is aware that he cannot daven properly, but he knows how to whistle better than anyone else. He put all of his love of Hashem into his whistling, meaning everything I know and all I have belongs to you. Our prayers may not have reached God, but your son's whistling pierced the very heavens. If you look at footnote 20, many attribute this story to the Baal Shem Tov, which I think it comes from the students quoting the Baal Shem Tov. There are different versions of this story. Anyone have ever heard a different version of this? The boy comes in, he doesn't know how to daven, so he doesn't know Hebrew, he doesn't know the Machzor, so what does he do? Anyone heard a different version of this?
Yeah, he's a shepherd.
He's a shepherd. Yeah, yep.
Right.
Well, you were going to get to that. Actually, okay, that's good. That's a version. And I know another version of this story. He doesn't whistle. What does he do?
Plays the flute.
Very good. Very good. And there's another version.
Recites Aleph Bet.
Very good. Recites Aleph Bet. So this was an oral story that the Baal Shem Tov used to say, it seems. And there were different versions. So Rabbi Wohlgemuth has the version that he whistled. Some say he starts in the Aleph Bet, right? As if to say, thank you, Louise. I don't know the words. I don't know what to say, but I'm going to say the Aleph Bet and let it go up. And Hashem, you rearrange them into the right words. Now, the flute, which is, I think, the shepherd version, it was a shepherd who played the flute. That is the most daring, extreme version of the story. Why?
You don't play a flute.
It's with the shofar.
Especially, I mean, why you don't play a flute?
Because it's Yom.
Very good, right? It was Yontiv, it was Yom Kippur. Some say that was the real original version, but it was, so to speak, censored. It was too extreme. Because if you have that version, what was the Baal Shem Tov saying? And you can see why maybe some disagreed with this. That even though the boy was breaking Yontiv, Yom Kippur, whatever it was, but his kavana was so heartfelt, it was better than what we were doing. Right? That is an extreme thing to say. It's much easier, it's more palatable to say, okay, he didn't know the words, but he said the Aleph Bet or he whistled, which you are allowed to do on Shabbos and Yontiv. And so that he reached a higher level.
Yeah, but Rabbi, that story is usually told about the beginning of Ne'ilah.
You're saying maybe Yom Kippur was over, you're saying?
It not quite, but that allowed the gates of heaven to remain open.
Okay, okay. Yeah.
I have a personal story that's related to that.
Please, Steve, thank you.
My grandson in New York, the second oldest, Daniel, he was here for Shabbos about a year or so, 2 years before his bar mitzvah. And I don't know about a lot of other grandchildren, but he really wasn't davening. He was sort of faking it. And that was the catalyst which made me go to the bookstore to buy a copy of Rabbi Wohlgemuth's previous edition of the book. And when I found that it was not in print any longer, that's what started my journey to finding how to publish it. And since then, my grandsons and I have gone 3 times through the new edition. And my grandson, Daniel, is quite a mensch. He doesn't have any problem davening with Kavanah. But it was his immaturity that led to this catalyst, me getting get off my butt, do something about it.
Well, it's good you did that, Steve, for all of us. Any other thoughts on this story, the shepherd boy? You know, again, I'll just add that, you know, this is really introducing another level. Again, I sort of alluded to it before. Rabbi Wohlgemuth was talking about basic kavanah in the sense of, you know, knowing what the words meant. But obviously there are deeper levels of kavanah, of really, you know, your heart opening up, your heart being pulled, you know, pouring your heart out. You know, as we know, sometimes that's connected to the words of the davening, sometimes not. Sometimes during Kedusha or other parts of for singing, or there's a tune, and it's really not about the words. You know, our sama nafshi lekel chai, my soul, you know, thirsts, yearns for the living God. Or, you know, sometimes we're pouring our heart out, you know, asking for something from Hashem. So the sort of levels of kavana never, you know, there is no end. Again, obviously that's not something that's required, but there are all these layers of kavana: basic awareness of davening, the basic meaning of the words, and more along the lines of sincerity, as Joe was talking about, of really feeling it. Any other, if I can ask, anyone else have a suggestion of something that helped them ever when they had a conscious attempt to improve their kavana? And can anyone think of anything that helped them or does help them?
I had two experiences were in the opposite direction, where I saw a total lack of kavana. One case was back in the 50s. It was a Friday, and of course Shabbos was over. It starts early on Friday. Went home, ate with my parents. We were through 7:30, and I knew that by Shalom at 8:30 had their services on Friday night, and I decided to walk there. I don't know, whatever it was, a 25-minute walk, whatever it was. And I went, and what amazed me was, although they were saying everything in English, it was obviously they were saying it, and you could hear the sing-songiness, that there was zero sincerity and not a clue as to what they were saying at all. That was one case. The other case was even more extreme than that. When I was in the Air Force in Georgia, I was in a little town called Bainbridge, Georgia, in the southwest corner of Georgia, where you threw a stone to the west, it was in Alabama, threw to the south, it was in Florida. Interesting town. I was the only Jew, of course, among these hundreds of people at the base, and one of them happened to be a Catholic whom I had known since I had started with the Air Force. And he said to me, "How would you like to come with me on Sunday morning to Catholic church?" Not knowing that I shouldn't have gone, I said, "Sure, I'll go with you." And I went with him. And of course, the service starts on the hour and ends 10 minutes before the hour. It's 50 minutes, so this crowd could leave and the next crowd can come. Well, the interesting thing was that the entire 50 minutes was in Latin. I was the only person in that church, including the priest, that knew what was being said. Now, you want to talk about a lack of kavana? I couldn't possibly imagine less kavana than that. Nobody in that church, including the priest, had a clue about a single word that was being said. So
Okay.
I think
we definitely can learn from that, Joe. And sometimes our davening does feel like Latin, unfortunately, to maybe some people. But anyone have a more positive suggestion or experience to
So
share?
I'd like to add that the whole idea of a chiyuv, who says Kaddish and prays for the whole year, it comes from kavana, because that person, when he goes to Yechazim, he actually probably will say the prayers with more kavana than any other person in the shul. That's why it's called a chiyuv. And there were days when not only for someone was grieving avlut, but also when someone has a sick person at home and he doesn't, was called a chiyuv. It just wasn't accepted as we don't accept it as a regular chiyuv, but it's also a chiyuv so that his prayers are accepted more than any other person in the synagogue.
I think that's a very interesting idea. Let me just reflect on that and just I think and you'll correct me if I'm not understanding what you said, but right, so there's a custom that someone who is saying Kaddish for the year, a man when he's saying Kaddish or on a yort site, so they also, if they'd like to, serve as chazan. Now, I think the basic understanding of the reason for that, the way I understood it, was that the person is reciting Kaddish for the merit of the person who passed away. And so we also offer them the opportunity to be the chazan, one, so he will say other additional Kaddishim that the chazan would say, and also have the mitzvah of leading the community. So it's, again, even more merits for the person who passed away. But you're adding another reason, which I think there's definitely truth to it. It's very interesting that the person, when they're saying Kaddish, they're very likely, they're the person in the minyan who of the men whose going to be most focused. It's the most meaningful. It's going to have the most kavana in the sense of a more heartfelt kavana. So they should be the chazan. They should be the chazan. Or you're adding someone who's sick. That person is going to be davening better, unfortunately, than others. That person should be the chazan. That will take our tefillos. It reminds me, the Gemara has a similar idea. I never connect as you did, but the Gemara says Maseches Tanis. The Gemara is talking about when there's a community Sarah. The typical example in the times of the Gemara was there was a drought, but there could be some other communal trouble that the community declares days of davening and possibly days of fasting. And from what I recall, the Gemara says that it gives the qualifications, the ideal qualifications of who you should pick to be the chazan. Again, this is just my recollection, so I might be getting a few details wrong here, but the basic idea is certainly right. And the Gemara says you should pick someone who beito rake. His house is empty. Now, that doesn't mean the kids are grown up and out of the house. So what does that mean? The Gemara says, what does it mean you should have someone whose house is empty? So there are two interpretations of the Gemara. One interpretation is it should be someone who has a good reputation throughout his whole life, and so to speak, as we would say in English, doesn't have any skeletons in his closet. That's what it means the house is empty. Okay? But the second interpretation of the Gemara is, no, what does it mean you should have someone daven whose house is empty? It means someone whose cupboard is bare. There was a drought, but there were always richer people who still had stuff stocked up, who weren't suffering to the same degree. And there were others who were really having trouble putting food on the table. And if it's really reached the point where we have to declare a community fast, you should pick someone, unfortunately, who is having a harder time, because that person will really mean it. That person will be really lead a heartfelt davening, where as opposed to someone who knows the community is suffering, but they're not feeling it in the same way. So it's similar to what you're saying. If there's someone who has a greater need, then in some ways that's the more appropriate chazan. Thank you. I read that. That's a very nice idea about the avel and the someone saying kaddish. Any other thoughts of yes, Louise?
Yeah, I've had a great deal of success with the Art Scroll Interlinear series, where it's basically they're translating everything word by word, and they do it in sort of the same way you would do a piece of sheet music written in Hebrew, where you have the Hebrew running from right to left and the English running from left to right. And I find that it slows me down, so you can't zip through it because it's word by word, and it helps if you don't, where I don't know a particular word or I can't conjugate it on the fly, the English translation is right there, and that helps a lot.
Thank you. I agree. That sounds like a great tool.
You can't daven fast when you have that.
Yes, Linda.
At the risk of sounding earthy, crunchy, I try to do visualization. So like Gadol, Gibor, Nora, like I have certain images that I imagine, that I think of the meanings of those words, and that helps me a lot. But I focus really just on the things that they say that you have to have kavanah for, because I have a short attention span anyway. But if I make pictures of it, that helps a lot.
Yep, pictures can that's not inappropriate at all. That's I think Koren has a siddur that has like pictures at key points, like Uvenei Yerushalayim, or not Bonei Yerushalayim. It'll have a scene of Yerushalayim. Yeah. Someone one time told me that he switches his siddur about once a year, like the actual siddur, the printing. So, Art Scroll to Koren to, I don't know, the Shiloh siddur, whatever, else there is, because just sort of forcing him to have different pages that he's not totally familiar with also sort of like what you were saying, Louis, slows him down, forces him to actually look at the words, look at the pages, helps him concentrate. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts about kavana?
There's more, keep going.
Yes, ma'am.
Keep going.
Okay, it's a lifelong challenge, and to some degree, this is an idea that will be running through our entire learning. It will come up and again and again, and to some degree, one goal of learning about davening and just understanding the different parts of davening will be to increase their kavanah. The more one understands it, certainly it is easier, and the more kavanah a person can have.
I'd like to add that the Sephardim have in their Siddur a menorah and Shivit Hashem Nagdi Tamid, which helps them, which is supposed to help them to have more kavanah in the tefillah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Reminded me of another point to share, because the truth is, again, we only have 10 minutes, so I'm reluctant to start a new topic, and the next paragraphs are really a totally new topic. There actually is a third kavanah that I'm a little surprised Rabbi Wohlgemuth did not mention it, maybe mentions it later. And that is because Salvation certainly spoke about this, and really it was sort of famously in the world of the Beis Medrash discussed by his grandfather, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and it appears in the printed book of Chidushim from Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and that is at least when it comes to Shmona Esrei, specifically to Shmona Esrei, there is an additional kavanah, additional awareness a person is supposed to have. So let's just review what Rabbi Wohlgemuth, what we read so far today. There's a basic kavanah. I am having awareness to fulfill a mitzvah, which a person should have before performing any mitzvah. And there is another kavanah specific to davening that is understanding the words, thinking about the meaning of the words. So there is a problem in the Rambam, because the Rambam in one place says that kavanah is only necessary in the first bracha of Shemona Esrei, like we just read, but in the subsequent brachos, again, ideally a person should have kavanah, but it's not necessary, and you do not need to repeat the Shemona Esrei if your mind wanders. But in another place, the Rambam writes, it is absolutely necessary to have kavanah during all of Shemona Esrei. This is what he seems to say. And if your mind wanders, you must repeat Shemona Esrei, and that's not limited to the first bracha. So is it the first bracha or is it not? So Rav Chaim Soloveitchik explained, again, based on earlier sources, other sources, that the requirement to be thinking about the meaning of the words, that is specific to the first bracha in terms of it being necessary. But there's an additional awareness a person is supposed to have during Shemona Esrei, and that is that he or she is omeid lifnei hamelech, is standing before the king, standing in the presence of God. He or she is in God's eye, which is specific to Shemona Esrei, does not apply to the other parts of davening. That a person is supposed to have some general awareness of that experience, that I'm speaking to Hashem, and even more basic than that, that I'm standing in his presence. I'm in the throne room, so to speak. What jogged my memory of that is you're quoting the pasuk of Shivisi Hashem lenegdi samin, that I place God before me, or many shoals on their Aron, right? It says, Da lifnei mi ata omeid. No, be aware before whom you stand. That's a typical line to have on an Aron in a shoal.
As a burning.
And so that is also something to sort of a more experiential awareness to have in our minds. Again, before Shemona Esrei, that's why, that's the custom of taking 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. All this we're going to discuss again in much greater detail when we get to Shemona Esrei, right? But you're sort of changing your location. You're standing to be in his presence, and then you step out of his presence at the end of Shemona Esrei. So that basic awareness, again, Rav Chaim said you should have during all Shemona Esrei. The problem is it's hard to have that basic awareness during all Shemona Esrei also. But that is an additional kavana or awareness or intention to have.
Rabbi?
Yes, yes,
So
Judith.
I was under the impression that Rabbi Wohlgemuth's approach was based on his training in the Hildesheimer tradition, not the brisk tradition. I remember being a student in the Maimonides school, and Shmona Esrei, the brisk tradition is you stand up completely. Rabbi Wohlgemuth, that was not how we were taught. After the initial kedusha, we all sat down. So two aspects here. The first aspect, it was Hildesheimer, and later on, that's not how it was taught in the Maimonides school when I was there many years ago.
So I can't talk, everyone who has personal, experience can speak more authoritatively than myself, but you are right that the Hildesheimer Yeshiva of Germany is certainly, Rabbi Wohlgemuth carried that tradition. We'll
Right.
see. He does quote Rav Soloveitchik a lot. So Rav Soloveitchik clearly was also an influence on him.
Yeah.
And I would be shocked though if Rabbi Wohlgemuth did not know of this Rav Chaim Soloveitchik that I just
Of
quoted.
course he knew.
Yeah,
Of
but
knew.
So it's of interest. He didn't note it, but and also again, this is not directly, maybe it appears later in the book in the context of Shmona Esrei. Very likely it might appear there. I don't know, but yes. Any other? We just have a few minutes left. Any other? We didn't cover as much ground, but actually I'm very happy. I think we had a very good discussion, and I myself learned a lot of different things and some very good ideas about how to have kavana. Even just speaking about it gives chizuk to all of us to try to have a little bit more kavana the next time we daven. Even just speaking about these ideas, I find helpful. But any other quick question or comment before we go? Okay, so we're gonna let class out a few minutes early today. And I don't know if Rabbi Wohlgemuth ever did that either, or he was a good German Yaki and everything was exactly punctual. But I think we'll hold it here. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful end of Hanukkah. And really thank you everyone who came and participated. And we look forward to seeing everyone next week on Wednesday. Thursday. Great seeing everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yes,